CityCast from Explocity.
Both practitioners and academics have tried for hundreds of years to codify the short story, but there is no one definition that can be taken as definitive. I remember an aside from R.K. Narayan, another adept of short fiction, on the difficulties of defining the genre. Apparently, he once attended a lecture on creative writing in which the instructor said, "A short story must be short and have a story." We laughed about this hapless take on the form, but perhaps we laughed too soon. Here's why. Joyce Carol Oates, the American novelist and short story writer, wrote, "Formal definitions of the short story are commonplace, yet there is none quite democratic enough to accommodate an art that includes so much variety and an art that so readily lends itself to experimentation and idiosyncratic voices. Perhaps length alone should be the sole criterion." I see the man that Narayan and I were mocking, rising above our laughter, and the "I told you so" expression on his face. Oates adds, "Whenever critics try to impose other, more subjective strictures on the genre, too much is excluded. My personal definition of the form is that it represents a concentration of imagination and not an expansion. It is no more than 10,000 words, and no matter its mysteries or experimental properties, it achieves closure, meaning that, when it ends, the attentive reader understands why." As a working definition of the genre, that's pretty good, but let Anton Chekhov, who's regarded as the father of the modern short story, have the last word on the subject. Remember that writers whom we call great or just good, and who make us drunk, have one very important feature. They're going somewhere and calling you with them.
What and when was the first novel? There are some contenders for this honor, but the most plausible for me would be Pamela by Samuel Richardson, first published in 1714, several times since. Widely accepted as the first English-language novel in the world, it is a racy, saucy, sexually-orientated story, and of course, for that reason, it was also the world's first bestseller. In 1832, the first book covers started to happen. In America and Britain, these books with designed covers sold for a penny. Largely the retelling of Gothic horror stories, these books came to be called penny dreadful. By the way, a penny was a lot of money for people, and that resulted in the sharing of books and so book clubs. Another story for another day. A significant moment in the history of publishing was the advent of the American brothers, Albert and Charles Boni, who started a mail-order publishing company. The pioneering efforts of Albert Boni resulted in the creation of the major publishing company, Random House, so-called because they decided the choice of published literature would be random by nature. And its success was followed in 1935 by Penguin, a hugely successful British publisher that published books that appealed to everyone. And mention of Penguin brings me to my guest today, David Davidar, the best-known name in Indian publishing. David was hired by Penguin in 1985, first as an editor and then very quickly as publisher. David took Penguin places, from publishing a mere 6 books in 1987 to 150 titles annually. He moved to Penguin Canada in 2004, but by then he had created a stable of literary thoroughbreds. Here's a sample. Shashi Tharoor, Vikram Seth, Ruskin Bond, Robila Thapar, Salman Rushdie, William Dalrymple. And one of my earlier guests on this podcast, author Pavan Verma, made singular mention of having been first published by David. David Davidar is at once a publisher, an editor, and a novelist of 3 wonderful books. He runs Aleph Book Company, a top-shelf publishing house, in partnership with Rupa Publications, where he continues to battle alongside the gods of academe with weapons of mass typography. Those in the business will not need me to say anything about David, but those who are readers of books and don't know much about the publishing industry, you can easily attribute a large part of your proud book collection to one man, and I feel privileged to be able to introduce him to you today. Davidar, welcome to the Literary City.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Let's start with you as an author. Now, specific reference to your book, The House of Blue Mangoes. Now, that was a painting on a large canvas, so to speak, and you set characters across generations in geo-specific locations at specific times. Now, researching that must have been quite something.
Yes, absolutely. It took me about a dozen years to actually arrive at a final draft, but it was a lifetime of thinking about the book. This harked back to my origins. A lot of the characters are based on family members. And I figured, I'd been a publisher, like I said, for a while by then, and I knew what the pitfalls first novels sort of ran into often.
Well, because first novels are important. And what advice do you have for those aspiring writers?
This is what I tell most people who try to write a first novel. I say, look, you just get one crack at it. So don't write something that is unambitious. Write something that stretches your talent if you have talent, and stretches your imagination, stretches your creativity. So don't go for something small. There is just one chance you have to sort of, make an impact as a creative writer. And, after that, it becomes, yes, we know about this person. And the world of creative writing is a fairly harsh and punishing environment. So you don't get too many chances to sort of recover if you don't have a really explosive debut.
Right. So back to your first novel, The House of Blue Mangoes.
So I put together, I said to myself, if I'm going to write a book which will stand some chance of succeeding, I need to be ambitious about it. So the family history gave it authenticity and foundation. But I just figured I should try and make it as ambitious a novel that took into account every single kind of nuance and factual detail that is sort of representative of that period in Indian history. I'm Tamil, so which also sort of was rooted in that environment. So that was an enormous undertaking. Hundreds of interviews with family members, scholars, sort of people who knew about that part of the world, and those don't happen overnight. And that is what accounted, I think, for the fact that it's so vast. It had a cast of hundreds, and there's so much information. To write a paragraph, I would read 5 books on something. And I honestly think that if you don't put in that kind of effort, you might as well not attempt it at all.
I understand what you're saying. Now, your writing is very rich in a visceral sense. So this creative writing, does it come to you normally, naturally, or can people actually acquire the way to be creative in writing and then express it?
Creative writing is not new anymore. In the 19th century, the novel form was sort of fairly new. And so you could make an impact just by saying something new, the world was being created. The world of fiction was being created at that time. Now it's old hat.
Still, I like the humor in your writing. Now, I recognize that sense of humor from having grown up with the same language and the same humorous references, the references of human foibles. Mm-hmm. Here's one, Moon White Thylum. I love that. It is so plausible. Was there really a Moon White Thylum?
Well, the thing is, it's interesting because, yes, I was sort of, trying to say something new and less cliched and dull about our obsession with fairness in our country. Especially in, we're all racist in that way, but, hopefully some of us rise above it.
And be happy they pull that stupid cream off the shelf.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But, the Thailand thing came from a great-grandfather I had, who was a very, very, very exceptionally wealthy man because he made a Thylum, which is a kind of balm.
What was it called?
It was called Guru Thylum.
Of course.
Yes.
You couldn't have grown up in Tamil Nadu and not known Guru Thylum.
Yeah. So that was my great-grandfather. Yeah. So that's where Moon White Thylum happened. I obviously didn't want to sort of make it true to life, but I wanted to sort of riff off the Guru Thylum bit.
That's wonderful. Now, here's an example of your creative writing skills. This passage where the 2 girls run away from the men that they did not first perceive as a threat. And as they run away, They register with unnatural clarity everyday sights. The fire of shoe flowers against a lime-washed wall, the waxy green leaves of a calotropis plant by the roadside, an orange butterfly on the road, and then everything begins to blur. Is this the sort of imagination that you believe will come out of a creative writing course?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the best writing courses, whether in America or Britain, the best writing courses in the English language happen in those two countries, because they've had a lot of practice there. I don't think you can teach creative writing. I think you can learn it from being a very, very good reader. The basic forms can be taught in a day. How do you get good at it? I mean, you can't learn that in a course. But what they do, which is a very good method, is have a group of people sitting around critiquing each other's work. It's a very small group of already talented people who are sitting there and looking at each other's work, which is the only thing that I think is helpful. The problem with most writing today is most people who purport to write don't read, and this is why most of the writing is amateurish. But you have a bunch of people who write who are not very good, a bunch of people who review who are not very good because they're not well read, and that is the curse of social media. Everyone's a star. It's so easy to press like on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. It doesn't take much thinking. It doesn't take much intelligence. It doesn't take much craft. And so this is perpetuated. I learned a trick from Garcia Marquez. Not that I know him, but I read an interview that he gave where he said, in order not to suffer from writer's block, I read some of my favorite writings the night before I go to sleep the next morning, and I write early in the morning. So the next morning, it's steeped in your consciousness and it comes out, it adapts to what you're trying to do.
Moving now to another novel of yours,
yes.
Ithaca, and I presume the title is based on the poem by Constantine Cavafy. You have an epigraph running right through the book. Now, I heard a rather cheesy recording of this poem by Sean Connery.
Yes. I know that. Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
For our listeners, there's a link in the podcast description to where you can find James Bond reciting Cavafy's Ithaca. I found that Ithaca had a certain freedom of expression. For example, this nugget from page 28. A shimmer of Buddhist monks lights up the gloom. For some reason, this line reminded me of something that I had read in a novel by Peter Benchley.
Yes.
I mean, he's known for writing Jaws. Jaws is Jaws. But two other books inspired me greatly, Q Clearance and the one, Lush.
Okay.
It's a story about an editor in the book publishing business who combats alcoholism.
Okay.
Reading Ithaca, I figured you would like that book.
Yeah, I should check it out. I don't know that book, no.
Right. At one point in the book, the protagonist, the editor, he feels rather remorseful for having edited out this sentence from a young writer's work. I feel as if he had punched me in the soul. Reminded me of a shimmer of Buddhist monks, such being the sort of neologism that could easily be edited out by an unsympathetic editor. Writers have to forego their best witticism always, right?
Always. The short answer to that is always. And I'll tell you a story. I had the good fortune of having one of our greatest writers edit House of Blue Mangoes, Vikram Seth. He edited it for me.
Uh-huh.
And the way it worked was this. I'd written the book, and when it was finished, I said to Vikram, I've edited you. Now will you do me a favor and edit my book? He said, fine. So my wife took the manuscript to him. I think he was in England at that time. So she took it to him, and he sort of very faithfully sat down and worked on it. And he would edit out some of my poetic excesses, lines I absolutely loved. And then in the margin, he put a little heart and sort of put an arrow through it, or no, not an arrow. He'd break the heart, saying, I'm breaking your heart, So yes, that's absolutely the case. So that was one story which is true. So yes, I absolutely think that the Benchley insight is true to life.
And the theme within the book about the trilogy of the Angels novels, or Angels Rising, etc., was that a shout out to Milton?
It came actually from Rilke,
right?
Not so much Milton.
Yeah,
the sonnet Orpheus, and
yes,
every angel is terrifying.
Right,
that's where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And but the trilogy has to do with all these big, George R.R. Martin type things that go on and on and on. And it actually also had to do with a book that I read when I was very young, which I really liked, which is a trilogy that Robertson Davies had done, the Canadian writer. But the angel kind of metaphor came from Rilke, and the kind of trilogy came from the fact that a lot of these guys who do books in the SFF sort of area tend to be sort of series.
Right. And literary novelties, like the chicken talking in Latin, are these things of the past?
I think it can certainly work today. Like I said, like we discussed earlier in this podcast, this is not a new form.
Right.
Everything that you're seeing today has been done before in terms of form. It's how do you make it new? How do you make it reflect the 21st century? What is your particular kind of talent to make something original and interesting to the reader? That's all you can do, honestly. I mean, you can't sort of reinvent the form, except in the stories that you have to tell and the way you tell them.
Would you say there's place for new ideas?
Yes, there's always place for new ideas, but we have to accept that novels, movies, certain kinds of music are very, very old forms from where we sit in the 21st century.
Speaking of which, Ithaca is a perfect segue from you as a writer to you as a publisher. Now, in that novel, you described the 80s. It was a scene back then. How have things changed?
The one thing we need to recognize today, all of those who work in publishing, people who look at the products that come out of the publishing industry, which are basically books and other kind of associated elements, it's one of many things that people which they can choose, right? When Dickens was writing, the novel was cutting edge. People would wait on the quays of various cities for ships to come in bringing copies of the book or latest chapter, because he used to serialize his book, the latest newspaper or magazine. It was the biggest thing in their lives, in terms of entertainment. Now it's one of 20 things, right? If you're a reader, if you belong to a family of readers, presumably that great gift has been passed on to you. If not, I mean, there are people I've presented a book to, they look at it as though it's an alien object. They don't know what to do with it. All the books that they've seen have been when they've sort of been in college. And again, maybe they sort of were reading on a tablet or on a computer. A book is an alien object to large parts of the world. So that is the reality that people in the publishing industry have to cope with. Nevertheless, there are more books that are being published today than ever before. Like I said earlier, most of them fail, but that doesn't deter publishers from producing even more books. If they're really bad at their jobs, the publishing company goes under and something else springs up in its place. But the publishing industry is not going anywhere. Books are not going anywhere. What is happening, though, is that obviously there are certain trends that you tap into. There's a lot of aspirational stuff that's going on, lots of self-help that's going on, lots of commercial fiction of kinds that did not exist in previous generations, where the commercial fiction is different. But there again, it's just a variation on a theme. The basic thing continues. There's no change whatsoever. The basic technology is no different. The printing might be more sophisticated. The printing might happen faster. You might be able to sort of have certain kind of labor-saving devices in terms of AI-driven sort of programs that will help you sort of proofread and so on. But at the end of the day, publishing has not changed. It's something where you gamble, that something that you think is going to work, you hope that it'll work. 20% of the time it works, 80% of the time it doesn't work, but then you go on, you move on. Numbers have come down because, like I say, once upon a time, writers were feted, writers were seen as demigods. That no longer is the case. Unless you're a social media star, and that I don't really consider real writing, in terms of long-form narrative. Otherwise, no, I don't think very much has changed.
Your last novel was, what, a decade ago?
Yes.
How does your publisher feel about you not writing for 10 years?
Well, it's something that I miss. But what I do at Aleph, which I didn't do at Penguin, is I'm a very, or rather, to be more accurate, I didn't do it at Penguin for a long time, because once you become the head of a company, as opposed to a working editor, you don't actually edit. You direct teams.
I know
right?
the feeling.
Here, while I'm ostensibly the head of this company, I'm actually a very hands-on editor. And when you're trying to make the work of very very good writers like, say, a Shashi Tharoor or a Vikram Seth or a Romila Thapar. These are people at the very pinnacle of their craft. And if you're trying to improve their writing even by sort of 0.001%, you need to be completely dedicated to that. You can't do it as a kind of, I'll just come in and sort of do a little cursory work. So that robs me of a lot of my creative stamina.
Right.
I simply I'm exhausted creatively when I'm sort of a hands-on editor. So the only way I think I can start writing again, do creative writing again, is if I disengage, and I'm some years away from that. So I think that is pure and simple the reason I haven't written now.
That's totally understandable and relatable. So is Aleph everything that you wanted it to be?
In many ways, yes. And I'll tell you why. The thing is, in the early days of Penguin India, and that was almost 35 years ago now, that was the closest I came to what I'm able to do now, which is I have some brilliant business partners who take care of keeping the company afloat and sort of thriving.
Right.
So I'm able to be very focused on our publishing. We're not a very large company. We publish about a book a week, which is about 50 books a year, which is not as big as, say, Penguin and Harper, who do about 200 plus books a year.
Sure.
But the fact that we are very focused on what we do, and we only do literary publishing, we don't do commercial publishing, we don't do self-help, Beyond Point, etc. We're very focused on what we do, means that we're able to invest a great deal of time and effort in trying to produce the best books possible. I honestly feel the world does not, certainly India does not need another publishing company, does not need another book beyond the books that are being published, unless they are special, And not every book is special. We recognize that, Yeah. But to get the 5 or 10 or 15 books that are special in a year, that we think are special in a year, you have to work really, really, really hard. We work really hard on books. And that is, for me, a great boon. It makes me really happy to be able to work on a book that has promise, has a good writer, has been written by a good writer, and try to make it the best book that's possible. No book is perfect. I can point out flaws in every single book that's ever been published because, it's a subjective process. There might be some craft to it, there might be some polish to it, there might be some genius to it, but you can find flaws. So the job of a writer, the job of an editor, the job of a publisher is to try and make the book the best possible book it can be. And that's what we try to do at Aleph. And the reason I'm quite thrilled about the way things have worked out is usually when you are working for somebody or running a company, there are a myriad distractions which take you away from this fundamental process that I enjoy, which is trying to make a book the best possible book it can be. And that's what we do here. And I'm very grateful that I've been given the opportunity to do it.
Right. Let's talk about when you first saw a Kindle.
I had no problem at all. None at all. For me, it's just another mode of reading. I personally love the kind of effort that goes into making a book a beautiful object. But I'm completely agnostic and I'm completely indifferent to the way people read. So long as they read, that's great. Kindle doesn't bother me at all.
I find Kindle has increased my reading.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you suppose there'll be a generation of people who have never held a book, a printed one?
Well, no, not yet. Not yet. Books are thriving. Physical books are thriving. You see the really interesting statistic, and I think it's still valid, is when e-readers came along, Kindle, like Kindle, etc. There was great perturbation in the book industry that they would destroy the physical book and render publishers irrelevant and so on. But even in the most advanced countries in the world, and I mean this purely on the basis of people who read digitally and electronically, it's plateaued. Physical books are still the most preferred way of reading everywhere in the world. including in America and South Korea, which are the most wired countries on earth, which is remarkable to me. People still want the physical book.
That is promising indeed. A larger number of readers means a larger number of books published, which in turn is a larger opportunity for writers. And this brings me to your latest offering, A Case of Indian Marvels, edited by Davidar. That's you. An anthology of, I counted, 40 writers. How did you pick them?
Well,
Whom did you leave out?
Okay. I start from the basic premise that you can't do a good anthology by committee.
Right.
You can't have 100 people sit there and say, okay, this is what the anthology should be, which is what government does, and you come up with some fairly ordinary books,
Truly.
So there needs to be a clearly defined idea of what this book should contain. If there'd been another editor, he or she might well have come up with a different selection. So it is a very subjective process. So when I've been wanting to do this book for a couple of years, because there is no such book, on the market, which focuses exclusively on writers who belong to two generations, who are now the oldest members of those generations are 40, which is no longer young. There were some writers who'd already made a name for themselves, so they were automatic inclusions, especially if they wrote short fiction. And then I couldn't tell you with any great degree of accuracy, but maybe we had 100, 120 books that made up the short stories that made up the long list. And then it had to be whittled down. So somewhere in the introduction, I say this is like great Fenny or Irish whiskey. It's triple distilled, quadruple distilled. Experienced editors have looked at it once, twice, thrice, 4 times before these. And these stories have passed every single such scrutiny. And of those, from my very subjective kind of perspective, things that appeal to me, I have a very clear understanding of what it is that turns my crank, if you like, where short stories.
And those are?
I like stories that, without being overly or overtly didactic or kind of preachy, deal with our current reality or our past reality in very smart and political ways. You must have a point of view. There is insight and there's advocacy or whatever it is that you want. And if a story doesn't have that, to me, it becomes a bit vapid.
What about experimental stuff?
I love experimental fiction, but how far can you take experimentation? Because to my mind, most of it has already been done. So unless you are some kind of genius, and I do believe that many of these writers are exceptionally talented, you limit yourself by if all you're looking for is experimentation. I think you need to be able to tell stories. I think you need to tell stories that are invested with the politics and the history and the kind of primary trends of your time in order to make your fiction effective. So this is largely what I wanted. So I'm very happy with the way this has come out.
That's great. There's a link in the podcast description to where you can buy A Case of Indian Marvels, edited by Davidar. Now to close, I'd like to go back to Ithaca, and you have a Martin Strel allegory in it. To quote, "All it illustrates is that we make our journey through life. Deep down, we have no real idea of why we do what we do, and even less control over what the outcome will be. All we can do is make the journey." Now, how much of that is the philosophy of Davidar?
I think for all of us who have the luxury, again, of thinking about these things, and most of us don't have that luxury. It's a constant struggle to survive from one day to the next. You're not thinking too much about the greatness of the journey or whatever. But for those of us who have the luxury of being able to not worry unduly about where your next meal is coming from or whether your oppressive environment is going to crush you, and can think about whatever deeper meaning underlies our existence, I think there is. I think it's really, really important to understand that any triumph or objective or endpoint is either meretricious or transitory or ultimately not satisfying. I think what you're here for really is to experience a journey in its fullness. There will be, as Kavafi says, there will be highs, there will be lows, there will be kind of dull periods, there will be kind of whirlpools, there will be diversions. just roll with it. I mean, if you can. For most of us, it's not possible. There will be times when we sort of, say, hey, this is great. Other times when we say, why is this happening to me? Why can't I, make more sense of this? But it's okay. You're alive. You listen to Louis Armstrong and say, I'm okay.
I know that tune. And on that note, Davidar, this has been one of my most enjoyable discussions, and thank you so much for being my guest today on The Literary City.
Thank you so much. It's been completely pleasurable. Thank you.
And that was Davidar, publisher, editor, novelist. And now for that fun segment, What's That Word?, where we look at words and phrases that we use all the time but never stop to think about where they came from. I'll be back in a minute or less, depending on where you are. And I'm back with What's That Word? And with my co-host.
Hello, my name is Pranati, but you can call me P. That's P with an A, not another E.
Hello, P with an A. All right, what's that word?
What? Already? No talking first.
What's there to talk about?
Everything.
Okay, let's talk about what's that word then.
Okay, fine. But first, great interview. Davidar was so absorbing.
Yeah, he was.
I mean, I learned so much from him.
About?
Well, for one, how not to approach writing a novel.
Yes, there's that. David did have good advice there. Well, that's advice from the best.
Yeah. And I loved your bit in your monologue about the first novel.
Pamela.
Yes, Pamela. And you said it was a saucy tale.
Yes, I did. And yes, it was.
Yee, so please dish. Let's have the hot goss.
Okay. The hot goss. Pamela was a clickbait story, okay, about an underage maid who was sexually set upon by the master of the house. Racy stuff, presumably.
Oh no, was it rape?
Attempted rape, at least, I would say. But as it turned out, she resisted his advances and she was virtuous. And there hangs the tale.
Gosh, what a subject for the world's first novel. I mean, what was the public's reaction?
Well, for one thing, bestseller, as I already said. But predictably, the book came in for great opposition from an alarmed moral brigade who feared that it would be a positive influence on young girls.
What? How? I mean, that's absurd. How would young girls be positively influenced by a story of a maid who was sexually mauled?
I have no clue, and I do not second guess this. Anyway, the moralists call themselves the anti-Pamelists. All right. For the title of the book, Pamela, can you believe it? Anyway, thereby making the book a bestseller.
I mean, controversy is the best marketing for a book.
Right. And she didn't even have to hashtag him.
That is true. But back in 1740, did they even have that symbol? The hash or the pound sign?
You would be surprised.
What? No way. You're telling me they had the hash in 1740?
Yes, they did.
Fascinating. Okay, that settles it then. Today's word will be the hashtag, or rather, the hash symbol.
Okay, sure. Well, actually, I know of this very well from the days that I studied typefaces and the history of typefaces.
What did you do that for?
For fun, No, it's true. You see, in the 80s, I was involved with a company called Linotype in the UK.
Yeah, I heard of Linotype. The typesetting dudes, right?
Correct.
I actually saw a documentary called Helvetica, about the font. They had it in a vault or something.
Yeah, I saw that documentary too. And you know what? Helvetica is owned and preserved by Linotype, and I have been to that vault. It's in Frankfurt. And I have actually held what you saw, Helvetica.
What? That is cool. You're full of surprises.
Thank you, I guess. Well, at least I'm not full of that other S word.
No, you're not. But okay, go for the hashtag.
Okay, here goes. First of all, the hash symbol is called the octothorpe, okay?
Okay.
Now, the octothorpe or the hash or the pound sign does not have the same history that conventional punctuation marks do, like the period or the question mark. But the earliest known of the octothorpe dates back from the written logbooks of traders in southern Europe, like Italy, in the 17th century. That means 1600 something, years before Pamela was written, when they did a rather funky version of the shorthand for pound, as in the weight. And we all know that they use LB for pound, LB in the lowercase. And historians have said that the hash came out of a very messy scrawl of LB. Now, imagine LB written in a lowercase and a line running through it for a flourish, like some people do with the letter 7, or the number 7 rather. And then you can see how both the hash symbol as well as the symbol for the British currency, the pound, came to be.
That's cool. That is fascinating. But I have a question. Why the letters LB?
Fun fact, LB stands for librapondo. That's Italian for weight in pounds. Now, a pound is a measure of weight and a unit of Brit currency, Italian roots.
Molto bene. But how did it land up on our keyboards?
Right. So typically, letters and symbols in typography were first used by compositors. Those guys with the old style manual typesetting, letter by letter.
And this didn't?
This one seems to have gone straight to the typewriter. Now, the first typewriters were commercially available in the early 1800s, but it was not until 100 years later that keyboards started to get standardized with the hash or pound symbol.
Or the octothorpe.
Exactly, but no one calls it that, all right? So by the early 1900s, the hash appears as a standard on typewriters, and it's a good thing too, because by then that symbol was also used to refer to a number. For example, hash 1 means number 1, right?
Right. Yeah, we see that all the time. So where else is the hash used?
In coding, like in tech, when you put a hash in front of a line of code, you render that line non-functional. You comment it out, they call it.
Interesting. But tell me about the name octothorpe. That doesn't sound like it has 17th century etymology.
No, it doesn't. Good catch. You see that symbol on phone keyboards, right? On every phone keyboard, there's a hash symbol.
Yeah.
So some dudes from Bell Labs in the US named it octo for the 8 line units that make up the symbol. And then on a whim called it Thorpe. They added Thorpe as a tribute to Jim Thorpe, the first Native American who won gold medals for the US. I think in the 1912 Olympics, he won the gold for both the decathlon and the pentathlon. So, octo for the lines, Thorpe for that guy.
Is that true?
So they say.
Okay, but lately, finally, the Twitter hashtags. I'm sure you have some dish on that too.
I do. Okay, in 2007, this guy, Chris Messina, decided to use it as a symbol to provide grouping to a subject. So in a 2007 tweet, he did hashtag, and I forget which word it was, but then clicking on that word meant that people could then see every tweet that was grouped to that hashtag.
Okay, but wait, Chris Messina, like the actor?
No, not the guy who played Danny whatever on that Chocolingam Girls show as her love interest.
Chocolingam? Who, you're talking about Mindy Kaling?
Yes. Kaling is short for Chocolingam.
I knew that.
Sure sounds like you did.
Busted. Okay, TMI, dude. TMI. My head spins. I will go deep breathe now. Hashtag bye.
And that is our show. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. I'd like to thank my guest, Davidar, and my co-host, Pranati P with an A, Madhav. Now, go hit that subscribe button before you go. Why miss an episode? And see you again next Wednesday.